Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Launchpad to Success, Crack the Startup Code, brought to you by your Vanderbilt Alumni Association. I'm Kelsey Campbell, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Campus Engagement in the Alumni Office, and we are thrilled to have you join us today. We will give everyone a minute or so to log on. In the meantime, I want to provide you with some details about today's webinar. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes, and there will be an opportunity for a Q&A towards the end of the presentation. Should you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them via the chat function. This webinar will be recorded, and we will add the webinar to our Alumni Association website. We will also email you in the direct link in the next coming days. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Tiffany Franklin. Tiffany combines over 2 decades of expertise in her dual roles as a recruiting manager in executive search and a seasoned career coach. Tiffany's journey in the corporate world and academia has equipped her with a deep understanding of diverse industries and the nuances of career development. With a BA in psychology from Vanderbilt University and an MS in education from the University of Pennsylvania, she has honed her skills in various significant positions, from working in university career centers at prestigious institutions like UPenn, Vanderbilt, and Drexel, to recruiting VP and C-level executives for a national boutique firm. Her expertise also includes a stint with the international creative staffing firm and managing her own executive career consulting business. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Kelsey, and I'm so glad to be here. It's always great to connect with fellow Vanderbilt alums. And today we're going to talk about Launchpad to Success. So what about everything you can think of for wanting to work in startups? Okay, some of the topics that I'm going to go over today are, first, how are we defining a startup? And then we're going to look at the different stages of funding, because that can really affect the startup experience. Why would you want to work for one? What can be some of the challenges? A lot of times there are many myths around working at a startup versus a more traditional company. Understanding the culture, talking about the hiring process, building that startup-friendly resume, mastering your interview, negotiating your offer, how to thrive in this new world, growth opportunities, and when you maybe should think about leaving, and then additional resources for you. So let's talk, what is a startup? Basically, a startup is a young company that was founded to develop a unique product or service, bring it to market, and make it irresistible and irreplaceable for customers. So the startups are all about innovative approaches and rapid growth, and it's all about the potential. So they're often mission driven, and they aim to solve a critical problem or fill a gap in the market. Sometimes, though, there's a high-risk nature of it, that they often have a focus on venture capital, funding rounds, and for many, the goal is a lucrative exit. I have some resources along the way of what is a startup if you want to read some more about that, and when you get the slides, and there'll be that for you at the end. Okay, so the funding stages. If you look at various sources, they will define them in different ways in terms of the money that, oh, it needs to have raised this much to be considered pre-seed or seed. But I like this little diagram. So do you want the one where you're literally in somebody's garage and you're just coming with the kernel of an idea? Or do you want maybe a mid-stage one that has been around for a couple of years, but it's still maybe your employee number 10? And there's a link right there with Finmark about how to get seed funding. And I think even though you may want to work at a startup, it's helpful to read those articles of how they're getting their funding. So when you think about what is that mindset of the founder as you're speaking with them, because it's so different from a hiring manager at a Fortune 500 company. Here's another visual that I like that really shows it, going from that idea stage where maybe you have a friend of yours, say one of you's more techie, one of that's more on the business side, then you recruit your family and friends, and it's showing how the piece of pie gets divided. Your uncle may put in 5%, your co-founder, and then as you go through and maybe get some formal funding, how that starts to get further divided along the way. Okay, now this is another thing. When I was at University of Pennsylvania and we had a lot of students that were interested in startups, we would use these definitions of pre-seed, meaning under $250,000 worth of funding, seed being up to $1 million, and so on through that level. So if you ever go to a career fair that has about startups, be sure to look at what type of startup it is. When it gets to the mezzanine level, I mean, a lot of these companies, it's, well, are they even considered, I don't think many people consider Google a startup anymore, Alphabet, and, same with Facebook Meta, but, for a long time, they did identify as such. So why would you want to work for a startup? Well, first of all, there's rapid growth opportunities. And one of the things that when I speak with clients, I mean, I've worked with over 1,000 clients in the past 12 years in my side business, helping them with their resumes, helping them with get promotions and do some mock interviews. And when I talk to people from startups, it's always no 2 days are alike. I am wearing many different hats. They'll tell me, you know what, we need to do more accounting, go learn accounting this weekend and get back to me on Monday, and you do that. And this is a person who was hired for marketing. So while that may be completely terrifying to some people, a lot of others may think that's exhilarating. And so it's knowing enough about yourself of what you feel that is. And again, it depends on the size of the startup. Also, it's really impactful work. I mean, you think about you can have a much higher title much more quickly at a startup because with there's so few people, it's like Nike cross training, everybody's doing different things. And then as you start to get growth, you're already in the leadership team, especially as it gets towards an exit. But of course, with that, increased title comes increased responsibility. But there can be a lot of impactful work. And, employees at startups are often at the cutting edge of technology and business practices. So what are the challenges? One of them is going to be instability. People often talk about runway, and I talk about it a little bit later in the presentation formally, but you'll hear a statistic, 90% of startups do not, they fail. Now, it may not be right away. Maybe it's after the first year, maybe it's after 5 years. But so are you okay with working at a company that may not exist in a few years? It can be super intense in terms of with those expectations, people may not be formally trained, and maybe they were just an amazing coder or they came up with this great idea. It does not mean that they know how to do HR, that they know how to do all these other work functions. Also, the salaries sometimes may be lower, but then there could be more of a potential for equity. So again, that risk tolerance, would you be able to take a lesser salary in the beginning, but much more of a potential upside if it hits? So let's go over some myths. First of all, I have often heard the thing that most of these positions are technical in nature. And yes, technology is a huge part of many startups. There are an array of roles beyond the tech, including that business development. They need to get new clients. Even if they have the most innovative product in the world, they need to be able to market this and sell it and understand. So if you bring that knowledge, that's really incredible. One thing I've noticed a lot of times in my executive search, because I help a lot of companies that are VC portfolio companies as they're looking for their C-level executives or VP levels. And when we look to people, we like a lot of that big little experience. So, for instance, they may have done a few years in a Fortune 500 company, but then they did some time at a startup. So, each one of them can be a valuable thing for you to leverage. And I mean, it's fine if you go your whole career in startups or your whole career in Fortune 500, but I do feel like the people who have a mix have a distinct advantage. Okay. And then the next one is there's less stability. Well, we just talked about that. That is true by nature. Startups are just more dynamic. And then all startup positions are unpaid. And that's a myth because, again, the compensation structure may be a little different in terms of involving equity and for depending on this funding, but there's definitely opportunities where it's not just like you go to unpaid internships to work at a startup. Okay, let's talk a little bit about startup culture. I think one of the biggest things is making sure that the fit, and of course, like anything, it's going to depend on the company itself, but really so much of it comes from the founders. And it really, are you talking about a company that has 10 people, or are you talking about one that has 100? And what I see sometimes is people may get disillusioned as their startup grows and they have to be are the founders being intentional with the culture as they're scaling? And so these are some questions that you want to ask in the interview of, where do they see the startup going and how do they intend to incorporate, keep the culture that has made it so special. But some unique things that you often see across the board with startup culture is that agility and flexibility. So they value being able to pivot quickly in response to market feedback. That's how they stay alive through those early stages. There's often flat hierarchies. It's hard pressed to find a Fortune 500 company where somebody who just started, maybe as an associate, could walk down the hall and get in to see the CEO, where you may be just across the hallway from them or in the open room, more likely at this, further down the table if you're in a startup. Again, that emphasis on innovation. So if you're somebody that doesn't like change, startups would probably be a tough place for you. Not that you couldn't thrive there, but you'd really want to look at yourself and say, is change, if you thrive with change, that's more of a fit. And then that passion and commitment, I feel like startup employees, it's so common to hear of the 80-hour plus work week when it comes to a startup. So if you're going to be giving that amount of hours, you really want to make sure it's something you love. The hiring process. So oftentimes, you will see startups on some of the boards. And in fact, I'll talk about some resources for you next where you can go and find the actual job listings. But there's also a variety of entry points, which, networking, meetups, direct outreach. And I mean, this mirrors just any job, but it's especially important. So, for instance, maybe conferences or could be competitions. Maybe there's like a coding competition. Look for where the startups are presenting their product, be it a service or a product or what they do, and then find them there and just even having some intelligent conversations with the founders about why you're a fan. When I did my podcast, which I'll have a link at the end, where I had of one of a startup founder talk about his experience and what he looks for in hiring, he said he wants somebody who's a fan, somebody who has used the product, can understand it, and will be ready to talk about it to other people. Also, referrals are huge. So if you know one of your friends who's working in a startup, then that's a great way. Reach out to them. I mean, at the very least, get to know, pick their brain through that informational interview, where it's just flipping an interview on its head. It's you asking questions of someone about why they like their job, what's their startup like. And you never know, as you're talking to them, you may learn about opportunities within their company, and employee referrals, whether startup or more traditional companies, are always huge. In terms of the skill and culture fit, I think culture fit, they're much more intentional about that in terms of through the hiring process, especially when you have a smaller number of employees. you're going to want to make sure that everybody who comes in really fits well with the group. So like I say to all my clients, just be the best version of yourself, because you don't want to be somebody you're not. It's not enough to just get the job. You want to make sure that you're seeing along the way if it could be a good fit for you as well. So be very honest with yourself. In fact, one of the things I'll give you in the follow-up is a values exercise. And I love everybody to take this exercise at the beginning of a job search and when they're evaluating offers. And essentially, it's just about 35 different qualities of what's in a job. Could it be, what's important to you? Do you want to work in a team? Do you want to work more autonomously? Do you want something that's all about money and status, or do you value flexibility? And you choose what are the 5 most important to you at this moment in your life. And you can see as you look at those values, do they resonate with working at a startup? Also, the speed and agility. The hiring process typically is pretty quick in startups. I mean, they may be more intentional about culture, and these days, it's pretty common for people to have 5 rounds of interviews, although many of them may be just like we are here on Zoom. Of course, it would be the, one-on-one talking, but, it could happen over maybe 2 weeks, where at a bigger organization, you may have so many more hierarchical layers to approve things that it could take longer. So some great platforms, for instance, are Well Found. For many of you who have maybe dabbled in this before, it used to be AngelList. And what I love about Well Found, they not only have the jobs board, but they have some great salary data that you can check out on there and look at for the different city, the different industry. And that really is a lot of bargaining power for you. So by the time you do get to the offer stage, you can see, has any of the data covered, where you are. There's other things like Glassdoor, where you can type in a company name and then see other people have entered salary info. It's not tied to any specific name. It's an aggregate, but it can be very helpful. And as always, with any offer negotiations, always make sure it's in terms of the value you will deliver uniquely. Another thing is Venture Loop, and they have all these startup jobs on there, so you can check out companies. Also, some people decide not only to go just for a startup company itself, but the venture capital firm that's funding many of these startups. So that may be something that's interesting to you. And for any of these, I recommend, by all means, go and connect with Vanderbilt alumni. You can go on LinkedIn and just go to the Vanderbilt LinkedIn page and find alumni and put the keyword startup in there and see where the Commodores are throughout the world who have startups, and reach out to them. You don't want to say, oh, can you give me a job? I mean, but you can see, would they have 5 minutes or 10 minutes to connect? You'd love to hear about their experience. And if they don't get back to you, I mean, they may be super busy. They may get a lot of leads. The timing may be wrong. So that way, if I want to talk to 2 people, I may reach out to 5 and see what happens. Okay, building a startup friendly resume. Now, like with any job search, you want to make sure that you are highlighting relevant experience. So you tailor your resume to every job to which you apply. In terms of skills you want to highlight are that versatility and the initiative. And one of the things you can do is use ChatGPT to help you with this. If there's a job description, you can take it, put it into ChatGPT, say that, you're a job seeker, you need to tailor your resume to this particular job description. Please pull out the 20 key skills that are necessary. Sometimes it'll take them out and describe them, and then I'll say, okay, that's great, thank you. At the Southern in me, I still thank ChatGPT. I can't help myself. But anyway, I will go through and say, okay, now take the list and just the keywords. And what I like to do for a lot of, resumes that I do, both, my own resume over the years and resume that I do for clients, because I typically do about 5 client resume overhauls a week. I will start the resume bullets with the keyword of the skill that's being discussed in that bullet. It's much easier to read it like that as a recruiter, because then putting on my recruiter hat, I probably, like last week, I went through 300 resumes. And I, did about 20 different screens with people. And some resumes, they're making me want to hunt everywhere just to find it. So if you have those keywords and then you have a really solid bullet that starts with a strong action verb and it's quantified and it really paints the picture, not just of your duty, but what was your impact, that is huge. Other things are, you can even just put into Google or ChatGPT, what are the key skills needed for a startup? We talked about some of them, that agility, flexibility, being self-directed. That is a huge thing, being intellectually curious. All of those go a long way. Okay, now I talked a little bit about this already, but networking again is so huge. So be sure to attend startup events and meetups. You can just Google ones in your area or try and go to some virtual ones. And when it comes to networking, I am much more of a quality, not quantity person. I can tell you an example. 2 years ago, when I was deciding to pivot into executive search, I knew that it was something I wanted to do, and I had been on the periphery of it, but I didn't have a thorough understanding. So I talked to some of my friends from Vanderbilt, one who actually runs a firm in Nashville, and I knew he didn't do remote hires, so that wouldn't work out. But he took time, Chris Murdoch, his name is, love him, class of 99, shout out. And so anyway, he talked to me about what he does with his firm and what I could expect. And I can't tell you how valuable that was for my interview process to have that information. So the thing to keep in mind when you're networking is no, not every of your conversations is going to lead you to a job, but it's like every little bit is breadcrumbs that you can get some meaningful information to help you with the process. And also, I've met some great friends through networking. I have a podcast, Job Search Strategies with Tiffany Franklin, and excuse me, I'll have a link to it at the end. But one of the episodes, I actually have members of our Vanderbilt community talk all about networking. So definitely want you to check that out. And if you have any questions. Okay, moving right along. So the startup interview, I think it can be all over the range of interviews. I mean, some of them may be a casual coffee meeting where I've had clients that come to me afterwards and say, I thought I was having coffee. I didn't realize it was an interview, which, by the way, if you're meeting with them, whether on video or in person, I don't care if they're, wearing jeans, which is very common for a startup person, it's an interview. So, and then other times they may want a formal presentation. So you want to think about how are you conveying your problem solving and critical thinking skills through these exercises or case studies. They may give you a real problem that they had encountered in the past because they want to see your instincts. And a lot of times it's not always about the end answer, it's about the process. So don't get so caught up, am I giving the right answer? It's what is your thought process to get there? Asking really intelligent questions that demonstrate your understanding of the startup's challenges and market. One of the tips I give to a lot of my clients is pretend that you were going to invest your money in this startup. What are the questions you would want to know? Because if you had that money on the line, which I mean, really, if you're trying to work somewhere, you have the time and effort. But I think people sometimes may dive a little deeper. And there's some great resources such as PitchBook and Crunchbase that you can do some research even into financials of startups. It may not always be public, of course, but at least if there's anything out there. Now, that stuff isn't free, but usually you can go to your local library or business library section, and they should be able to at least point you in the direction. But again, a lot of the same resume or interview tips are the ones that you would do just for a normal interview. It's again just focusing on the agility and flexibility. I have an exercise called the greatest hits, which talks really about those behavioral questions. I'll have them sent out in the follow-up interview that'll take you through that. And of course, if you ever need help, I'm always available. My services, you can reach out for an email and we can talk about if that would work. Okay, negotiating your offer. So a lot of this will come into the balance between salary and equity options. There's also benefit and perks. Sometimes you'll notice with startups, they may have like free food or unlimited vacation. Granted, that's becoming more, bigger companies are doing that too, but it may be more cutting edge stuff. So think about the values again. I always, even though you're not talking to them in salary negotiations about what your need is, that's what you figure out ahead of time. And then you figure out what are your needs, what's the value you deliver, what is the salary data on compensation for similar type companies, and also for that geographic area, because that can be a very big differential. And then I have a link there for the Muse, has a great article on negotiating a startup offer, and I'll send the follow-up email will have a few other resources for you. Here is that podcast episode I was talking about with Tarek Purtu, and he talks about, his take as a founder, and he's the co-founder of Uncubed, which is a candidate engagement and recruiting platform. And he has founded a job fair platform for college alumni, My Workster and Referio. You'll notice with a lot of founders that they're serial entrepreneurs, and that's just part of their lifeblood. It's what gives them energy. And again, one of the things that he talks about is that sharing your passion and also your patience and persistence and doing your research and being able to pitch to him. So you never go to one of these sessions, oh, tell me more about it. You want to have questions like, so I was reading about your presentation at so-and-so, and that was so intriguing. How did you come up with that, or something? Getting into their thought process or showing that you've done that initial work. Now, thriving in a startup environment. Talked a little bit about this before, but embracing change. Change, it's going to be rapid pace. So whereas, if you work at a big Fortune 500 company and things are so siloed and it feels like change is evolutionary, in startups world, it's revolutionary. So continuous learning and growth and taking the initiative to learn the new skills so you aren't left behind. You want to be the one setting the pace. The other thing is balancing work and personal life. As you can gather from this, it can be all consuming. And maybe that's something that for a few years of your life makes a lot of sense. That, maybe you don't have a family yet, or you're still traveling, or your kids are grown if you're on the other side of it, or even you're somewhere in the middle, but you have so much support with your family, you're able to do this. But for other people, it's, maybe that's not the right thing for them. Resilience and grit are things that are often discussed. So having a thick skin and being able, if something doesn't work out, okay, you dust yourself up, you get back up and figure out, okay, why didn't it work out? And what can we do differently? And let's just get right back to it. So I think there are a lot of great resources out there like Coursera or Udemy, or for skill building and networking events where I think you can talk to people about what their own resilience has been. Because I think those are interesting stories that people don't always get asked about, but they may appreciate. Growth opportunities and promotion paths. Like we talked about a little bit before, there can be rapid career advancement for this, especially as, say, the product starts to take off, and then you are one of the early employees, and suddenly you find yourself, maybe you were the lone HR person, and now you're the head of HR. And sometimes there can be imposter syndrome with the titles, but a lot of that is talking to other people. Find that community of other people, even if it's a completely different industry, but maybe startups in a different domain, but people in similar positions. You can find them through the Vanderbilt alumni groups, you can find them on LinkedIn and professional industry groups where really go and talk to people. Gain those cross-functional skills, because maybe you'll get bored after doing one thing. You could have been a coder, and then I see coders that they go to business development because they tap into a skill they really enjoy. And like I said before, leveraging this experience for future roles. So if you're talking to bigger companies and maybe they have a big transition going, or they're going through a buyout, you can talk about how you have been able to transition yourself, and that was change was such a constant thing. There's also some great resources like organizations like SCORE, with entrepreneurs who can give advice, and the Founder Institute. When to consider leaving a startup? Okay, you do want to think about, what are your personal goals, and assess them every so often, to see, have just because a startup starts out one way does not mean, again, by its very nature, it shouldn't just stay the same. So, do you like where the growth is going? As it's scaling, I mean, there's this in many different domains. How is it working financially? How much runway do they have for its existence? Are they growing too rapidly? And are they hiring at a pace that makes sense? And seeing, is this what you want to be doing? And I encourage everybody, just even once a year, more often if you're unhappy, to think about, where do you see yourself? How can you keep developing? And does it make sense? And I mean, sometimes it's just factors that are happening in the world. I mean, you think about the difference of somebody maybe at a startup for video conferencing in 2020 versus somebody who did a startup around going to concerts, and how the world disrupted that. I mean, that's a very extreme example, but you never know. So just always thinking of your next move and having your resume updated. Some resources, I'll go over some key job boards. There's also many startups. So for example, there's Startuppers. I showed you Wellfound, which was formerly Angel List, and we went over Venture Loop. There's a lot of learning materials, like Startup Lessons Learned is a blog by Eric Ries. There's also This Week in Startups podcast, a lot of community involvement. So I would go look at maybe if your city has an entrepreneur center, or if they have any incubators, there could be community events, great way just to go attend them and see if you like that community. On LinkedIn, there are several groups and Facebook groups where startup seekers can network. And, again, those online courses often have, there's many of them on coding or other things that are valued by many startups. So when I went into LinkedIn and then I put startup for the group, you can see 11,000 resources come up. So what you could probably do is do startup and then comma and then put your city, or put, if there's a certain thing that, narrow it down, and then look at the group, see how many members they are. You can get a sense if they're active, ask to join. Some of them will let you in right away. Some of them may take a little while. But what I like about these groups, I like to be a fly on the wall at first. And then afterwards, as you kind of get a sense for the cadence of the group, then start to be a contributor. And that's how you can start to show yourself as a thought leader. Some other considerations, like I said, what are the chances of this business surviving beyond 5 years? Really depends on the size, the age, the industry sector, and just thinking of, these 90% fail. So, and that's not intended to discourage entrepreneurs, but to encourage them to work harder and smarter. And, for many companies, it's that they misinterpreted what the market need was for their product. So always do some due diligence when you're deciding to join a startup. And I have various sources here. Some are both new ones from 2024, others are a couple of years old, but still as salient about, why do startups fail? Because you want to know what makes them successful in addition to what makes them fail, so you can go towards the successful ones. Okay. Now, if we talk about some due diligence, hold on, and my slide for some reason is not going forward. There we go. So questions to ask yourself as you're embarking on this process. What is my tolerance for risk is the biggest one. And then with that, financially, am I ready to take a risk? Do I have a cushion? If this startup goes belly up, can I, fund a job search for a few months? And then what stage is the startup now? What has its history been? And then if it's grown, has it shown fast growth? Have they been intentional about it? Who's in charge? And I think one of the things is making sure the company doesn't have someone in charge who thinks they know everything. Having someone who understands what they do well, but who surrounds themselves with really smart people who can fill in their gaps, that's huge. Who's funding the company and what is their end game? Do they want to exit or do they want to stay and just take it as long as they can themselves? Will this person be a mentor? What will your role be? Is there even one defined? And do you have the personality to shine? And this comes from a good Ann Fisher Fortune article. So some other due diligence, and like I said, is research the company as if you were considering investing in it yourself because your career is such an investment. And so the key takeaways are that startups can be an amazing way to take your career to the next level. I think it just takes, it's almost like the Wild West. It takes a little more due diligence and research on your part, but it can be an incredible adventure. And I think that a career doesn't have to be all startups or all Fortune 500. It can be a little bit of a mix. And I really am excited to work with any of you. I've wanted to, before opening up to questions, I just want to show you, here's my website, TJF Career Coaching. For clients, I have 1-hour Zoom sessions, but before I work with anybody, I have complimentary 20-minute consultations. So if you want to talk about resume overhauls, career explorations, or anything like that, I can help you. Also, since I am a recruiter on the executive level, I can give you insights from how I look at people from that recruiter level. But then I've also worked with college students for 16 years and everybody in between. So anything you need, I feel like I can help, but we can talk and see if there's a good fit there. And there's my email and there's my LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. I welcome you all and I really appreciate your time today. So I'm looking to see if there are any questions in the chat. Okay. So Kelsey, are you getting any questions? I am not hearing any right now. Ellen?
I am not seeing any either. Sorry, my Zoom took a minute to delay.
Oh, that's okay.
Hop on, but
Here, I'll stop here. Well, I really appreciate everybody's time. And like I said, I will have specific resources for you guys afterwards. So if anything comes up, don't hesitate emailing me, and I'm glad to do that.
thank you so much, Tiffany, for all the wonderful tips and information you provided us with today. Also, thank you to all who attended. Don't forget to complete the survey that was just dropped in the chat. We appreciate your feedback and are looking to provide you with the best career resources as possible. And we look forward to seeing you again. And thanks again to everyone.
Thank you.